Hi, I'm Mark from Samaritan's Well, and today we're going to do part one of Let Your Yes Be Yes and Your No Be No. That could be a little confusing, but virtually every writer in the New Testament addressed it in one way or another, including Jesus, so it must be a vital teaching. In James chapter 5, verse 12, after he's taught all of these incredible concepts in these first 5 chapters, he says, "And above all, my brothers and sisters, do not swear either by heaven or by earth or by any other oath, but let your yes be yes and your no be no, so that you may not fall into judgment." Just recently, I was meditating on this, and I think God really highlighted the word your. Every one of us has a yes and a no. You have a yes and a no. And I want to teach a little bit about honoring the yes and no. So that first concept is everyone, even a child, has a yes and a no. I've got a new grandchild, and he's just a few weeks old. He can't really make much communication, but if he cries, he's saying yes or no about something. And as the children get older, of course, they'll have vocabulary. They'll be able to speak. And one of the things we have to balance as parents or grandparents is how we honor the yes and no, but we don't enable it. So like, for example, with children, as they're growing up, 2 of the mistakes parents can make is either encouraging that yes and no to grow too fast, giving them decisions to make at 3 or 5 that they're not ready to make, or dominating or shutting down their yes and no and not allowing that or encouraging that yes and no to grow. Of course, think about what the yes and no is for a minute. Yes, I agree. No, I don't agree. Love honors the yes and no, but doesn't enable it. I honor the yes and no of someone else, but I don't enable it. I remember a couple I worked with, and the wife had kept quiet about husband's substance abuse for a long, long time. But finally she said, "I have to confront this. I have a yes and no also. And I've allowed his decision making when it comes to substance abuse to dominate the relationship." When she really found her voice, which is another way of saying your yes and no, things begin to change. And that's typically what happens when there's any kind of abusive or destructive thing going on in a family system, or really any system. When someone rises up and says, "I have a yes and no here, something has to change with this destructive pattern." So that's part of honoring the yes and no, is acknowledging that I have it. But also, like we said, me honoring the yes and no in others is really essential in learning about the balance of power in life. And in later parts, we'll talk about authority and how that works. But I want to tell you a story for a minute about someone's yes and no that was completely ignored, and it led to the downfall of one of the kings there in the Old Testament. Ahithophel was an advisor for King David who had the most remarkable reputation. No advice that he had ever given had been wrong. Anytime that he said, yes, this is good, it was always good. Anytime he said, no, this was bad, it was always bad. That was his reputation. His yes and no when it came to counseling or advice were 100% correct. Well, when Absalom, the son of David, had a rebellion against his father's kingship, David had to flee with a very scant force. And so when he was on the run, very soon after Absalom claimed control, Ahithophel recommended pursuing David immediately with their army of 12,000 men. David, though, who had been very savvy, had sent in a spy named Hushai, and Hushai convinced Absalom that no, they needed to grow their forces, go against Ahithophel's wisdom, and wait to attack David. And so the way it turned out, they rejected the yes of Ahithophel that had never been wrong. And it led to catastrophe for Absalom. So this is a dramatic story of a yes and no. In this case, an advisor who had been 100% correct before, and it was rejected. We see many stories like this, where either someone's yes or no is honored or it's dishonored, and the results that follow will clearly tell us that honoring a yes and no is one of our most significant things we can do. I want you to meditate. This is a podcast to meditate on. I want you to meditate on two things. Number one, how well is it established that you have a voice, that you have a yes and no in your life, in the little things and the big things? And number two, have you allowed and encouraged others around you, your spouse, your children, others that you're in your support system or your circle, to have their yes and no too? Because remember, love honors a yes and no, but doesn't enable it, doesn't idolize it. I hope this is helpful to get you thinking about your yes and no from James 5:12. Remember, we've got all the resources for counseling and many other teachings and podcasts at SamaritansWell.com. Thank you. If you enjoyed this podcast, please do us a favor and like, subscribe, and share with others who might need it. And you can find additional resources at SamaritansWell.com.